Hi, hello everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, CSOH, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's discussion. We apologize for starting a little late, about 5 minutes late than originally scheduled, um, but we're glad that you're here. So just a bit of an introduction about CSOH. So we are a think tank focused on understanding, preventing, and combating the multifaceted phenomena of organized hate. We conduct research on hate, violence, extremism, radicalism, and associated online harms geared towards policy advocacy and public engagement. My name is Gustika Yusufata. You can call me Gustika. I'm a researcher at CSOH focusing on digital extremism and online harms across Southeast Asia. It's a pleasure to moderate today's discussion with you guys. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that this is being recorded, the event is being recorded, and our topic today focuses on rethinking child safety online in Southeast Asia. So, the internet has transformed how children learn, connect, and participate in society, but it has also transformed how they are exposed to harm. Across Southeast Asia, children are increasingly encountering a wide spectrum of online risks. And with that, governments across the region have begun responding with new online safety regulations. Indonesia, for example, has recently implemented PP Tunas, and while Malaysia's Child Protection Code and Risk Mitigation Code issued under the Online Safety Act have also recently entered into force. Um, from Singapore and the Philippines have also recently introduced something similar to that as well. And these frameworks represent an important shift in thinking from responding to harmful content after it appears toward regulating children's access to digital platforms. It begs an important question. Are these regulations addressing the root causes of online harm, or are they primarily controlling access while leaving the design of digital platform largely unchanged? Many of the risks children face today are not simply the result of isolated pieces of harmful content. They are shaped by recommendation algorithms, engagement-driven business models, default platform settings, and product designs that can amplify harmful material or encourage excessive use. Recent events have also reminded us that these issues carry real-world consequences. In Indonesia, for example, online exposure has contributed to the two attempted school bombings in October 2025 and July 2025, done by high schoolers, so they're minors. And in the Philippines, investigations into a recent school shooting have also raised questions about the role of online extremist spaces, and apparently they learned these issues, that how these are conducted from their interactions online. So today's discussion brings together experts. We have here Ms. Suyin Chia and Dr. Jean Linisdenko. And we will be examining how Southeast Asia can better protect children online while safeguarding fundamental rights and ensuring that platforms themselves take greater responsibility for the environments they create. Again, we're honored to be joined by an assigned panel, and we thank them for sharing their expertise with us today. So I'll start with the introductions. Our first panelist will be Dr. Jean Linisdenko. She is a digital rights advisor at the Manusha Foundation, and Jean's work focuses on digital rights, technology governance, and human rights across Southeast Asia. Our second panelist is Ms. Anita Wahid, Indonesia's representative to the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, IHR. And Ms. Anita has extensive experience working on human rights, digital governance, and public policy in Indonesia and across the ASEAN region. And a third but not least panelist, we have Ms. Suyin Chia, Research Director at Initiate Malaysia, Initiate MY. Her research examines online harms, algorithmic amplifications, hate speech, and violent extremisms, with a particular focus on technology governance in Malaysia. Again, thank you very much for being here. So to begin, I'd like to invite each of our distinguished guests, our speakers, to deliver a 5-minute opening remark, and I would like to start with Dr. Jean Linisdenko. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustika, and your team for putting together this panel. because the question on the table or the brief that you sent me is one that our region, Southeast Asia, has been avoiding for a while now. We have seen how governments across Southeast Asia are moving, in fact, moving fast to regulate who gets to be online, and we call that process as gating, as gatekeeping, age gating, and it might either be through age-related policies, identity verification, and whatnot. But in almost all occasions that this topic is being debated, there is a question that almost always never gets asked with the same urgency, even. And that question to you, well, not to you personally, Gustika, but as a second person pronoun who happens to be listening in the room, is who actually profits from what happens to a child on this platform? And I want to spend my time here today on this panel insisting that that question cannot be ignored. The harm that children experience online, these are harms that are not accidental. They're not accidents of technology, but rather the predictable output of a capitalist neoliberal business model that our society is currently being dominated of. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for the opening remark from you. And may I welcome Ms. Anita Wahid to also give her opening remark.
Thank you, Gustika, and thank you, the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, for bringing us together for this timely discussion. And apologize for being late. I'm encountering a problem with my internet connection, so hopefully this will go well until the end of the event. So the question given to me was related to what is called PP2NAS. For those who may be less familiar with it, PP2NAS is Indonesia's regulatory framework for protecting children in electronic systems. It basically establishes age and risk-based rules for children's accounts. That is very much in line with the previous speaker said about age gating. And basically including restricting children under 16 from holding accounts on high-risk social media and social networking services, while also requiring platforms to assess risk, verify users' ages, and adopt child protection measures in their product design. So the question posed to me is whether the biggest implementation challenge for Indonesia's PP2NAS is ensuring that platforms comply with the regulation or ensuring that they actually redesign features that contribute to harm, such as the recommender systems, default settings, and engagement mechanisms. So to this question, my short answer would be that we should not separate the two. The real question is what we mean by compliance. If compliance is understood mainly as introducing age verification, obtaining parental consent, and deactivating accounts belonging to children under a particular age, then platforms could comply formally without necessarily making their product safer. But if compliance means demonstrating that children's actual experiences have become safer, then redesigning is not an additional aspiration. It's part of the compliance itself. That includes requiring social media platforms, digital platforms to go through changes to recommendation systems, default settings, contact features, data practices, engagement mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So I think it is important to recognize that the PP2NAS that was already existing and already in place since March this year, that it already provides a basis for this broader interpretation. The regulation is not solely about restricting access. It requires electronic system providers to implement technical and operational protections from the development of a product through its operation. So, and it also requires the assessments of risk that is conducted by their own measurements, by their own organizations that include exposure to harmful content, contact with unknown persons, exploitation of children as consumers, threats to personal data, addiction, psychological and physiological harm, and others. So the implementing regulation specifically recognizes technology and design that encourage children to use a service excessively or with increasing intensity as indicators of addiction risk. So this actually provides an entry point for examining how products are designed rather than focusing only on individual items of content. In the terms of reference or that was given by the organizer to me, you cited the situation in Indonesia where minors are being targeted and being recruited for by extremism groups. So this kind of stuff does not happen with only the minors being exposed to one or two contents. There was actually an operation that provides narratives that continuously being pushed to these minors. So only focusing on individual items of content definitely is not going to suffice in terms of protecting our children from extremism groups. So at least on paper, PP2Nice can reach beyond content moderation and age gates. The implementation challenge is whether we will use those provisions ambitiously or whether the most visible and easily measured part of the regulation will come represent the entire policy. And that means only looking at the age restriction. So let me be very clear that I fully support the intention to provide stronger protection for children online. The harms are real, serious, and evolving. We've seen that by now. We've understand that by now. Children are exposed to exploitation and abuse, cyberbullying, gender violence, extremism, harmful commercial practices, privacy violations, products designed that capture and retain their attention. Not to mention the risk of being trafficked, getting to online scam syndicates, etc. So governments cannot leave families to confront this risk alone, and they cannot leave children's safety entirely to the voluntary decisions of technology companies as well. At the same time, while also appreciating their intention, at the same time, I have reservations about placing hard age-based restrictions at the center of our response. Digital platforms are not only sites of heart. For children, they can also be spaces for learning, creativity, social connection, play, cultural participation, and access to information. They can help children discover interests, develop skills, and find communities that may not be available in their immediate physical environment. Now, this is very, very much important in our region in Southeast Asia, because this is a region that is marked by significant differences in geography, educational opportunities, disability access, and family resources. For some children, digital participation is not simply entertainment. It can be an important means of exercising their rights to education, information, expression, and participation. Furthermore, if we are looking at the situation of this region, we are competing when it comes to human resources. We are competing with other developed countries who are very much have access to developing their digital capacities. If we restrict this based on age, then we are not in the same par with them in terms of competing when it comes to our human resources skills. Therefore, we should be careful not to equate protection with exclusion, which I think is also the main argument of the previous speaker. So a hard restriction may reduce a certain immediate risk, but it does not necessarily prepare children for digital age and digital life, because age does not automatically produce digital maturity. That's what we know, right? If a child is kept off a particular platform until the age of 16, we cannot assume that on their 16th birthday, they will suddenly, miraculously understand privacy, understand manipulation, understand grooming, understand misinformation, understand extremist recruitment, harmful recommendation pathways, or understanding on how to manage their own attention. A birthday is not a digital literacy program. So this sentence, I often say that in a joking manner, but it reflects our sad reality, because what we want is to actually raise responsible users. So, but responsible digital users have to be educated, have to be accompanied and gradually given opportunities to practice responsibility. Children need to learn how to recognize risk, make informed decisions, protect their privacy, treat others responsibly, report abuse, ask for help, and understand how platforms attempt to influence their behavior. That means that if we restrict access without developing these capabilities, we may be only postponing risk rather than preparing children to confront it. So restricting, not exposing children to what's been going on in social media is actually can be detrimental to their own well-being once they reach the point where they can use social media. So, and I'm also concerned that a highly visible age restriction could become an easy substitute for the state's more demanding responsibilities, especially when it comes to equipping the society, educating the society, educating parents to make sure that they know how to protect children online. So deactivating accounts is relatively straightforward to announce and measure. Of course, we know that governments can easily point to the number of accounts removed as evidence of their action. But that number does not tell us whether children are safer, whether they are better prepared for digital participation, or whether the platforms themselves have become less harmful. So the state must still invest in the quality of education and integrate digital citizenship into learning from an early age. That means that it also must equip teachers, counselors, and parents, which unfortunately many of whom are themselves struggling to understand rapidly changing technologies. So it must provide accessible mental health and child protection services as well. It must provide effective remedies and trusted channels through which children can report harm and obtain assistance. And these are not secondary measures to be added after the regulation has been enforced. They are seen as they are an essential part of the state's responsibility to protect children.
Okay, thank you,
And
Vanita.
yeah.
Sorry, it was a opening remark. It was supposed to be 5 minutes. Sorry.
Oh,
We'll
that's okay. That's
so
not
sorry
the
about that.
okay.
It's
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
We'll continue. We'll continue after this. You made like very excellent points, and I will definitely like dig more from what you said earlier. So sorry to cut your opening short. I also want to welcome Ms. Suyunsha for her 5 minutes opening remarks.
Thanks, Gustika and CSOH for the opportunity to sort of add our perspective to this as well. I think where we're coming from today is to speak not just on Malaysia's, latest Online Safety Act, what we fondly call the ONSA, it's sort of in relation to child protection and really the risk mitigation aspect. But I think where I want to come from a lot more is on the tech accountability side. So really through the frame of when it comes to child safety online, who's paying the price, who's profiting from this, but also ultimately who's being made accountable, and whether or not the current legislative and policy frameworks, at least specific to Malaysia, is meeting the kind of evolving risk landscape online or not. And I think no surprises that the answer is definitely not, but I think hopefully we'll be throughout this conversation be able to unpack that a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suyin, for your opening remarks as well. You've all made very excellent points. So I guess we get to see like kind of the idea and what is actually happening in Southeast Asia. And I'd actually like to go back to Jean to maybe elaborate on basically how this is actually like a predictable business model. How in a sense are we just relocating the threat surface from online platforms to third-party age assurance providers, perhaps? Like considering that they will become the custodian of children's biometric and personal data under these acts. So, since you're an expert in platform design, so from a digital threats perspective, are these measures really addressing the root causes of harm, in your opinion?
Sorry. Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert in platform design. Thank you, Ed. More of digital rights. But yeah, thank you. Well, the thing is, what it does is it shifts responsibility rather than addressing the root causes. And the reason is very structural. Age assurance, parental controls, access restrictions, they all locate the fix somewhere other than where the harm is actually produced, in the household, in the individual child, in a piece of identification, but never in the recommendation engine that decides what the child sees next, never in the engagement metrics that a company is optimizing for, and never in the ownership structure that profits when a child attention is captured for as long as possible. So the root cause here is a business model, built on extracting time and data from users, and that model is most efficient precisely when it is targeting the most vulnerable, because vulnerability is what keeps someone scrolling. So I want to preface by saying plainly that the harms that we see on a daily basis on social media and all those news that you've mentioned a while ago, those harms are real. We're not here to relegate whether children are suffering online. We're not here to debate that. They are addictive, attention-grabbing designs keep children scrolling long past the point that is good for them, because their attention is the raw material that these companies extract and sell. So we have seen algorithms that are pushing eating disorder content to children. Cyberbullying follows children from home to school, vice versa. And then boys are being pulled into the manosphere, into looks-maxing, and they're being radicalized into a politics of grievance before they're even old enough to vote. And now we have AI arriving. Suddenly you have children turn to chatbots because no other institution in their life had the resource to fill that gap, that hollow gap. And anyone who tells you that these are not urgent problem is completely not being honest with you. But the question is not whether the state should act. The question is which class of a person the state is actually acting to protect when it does. Because when they try to legislate, the line is drawn between the platform and your age. So which means the age gating policies do not reach here. And that here is inside the platform, inside the business model, to ask why it is built the way it is built, who owns it, and who is entrenched by the harm it produces. So it's not only, because its only concern is to legislate outside of the platform. And that is because, why? Because that is the cheapest possible concession a government can extract from a capital. And when I say the capital, because it costs the platform nothing. It requires no change to the recommendation engine, no change to the ownership structure in which tech bros continue to stand on the back of the working class by feeding us crap, banking on culture wars, so we focus on hating each other, that we become too busy to understand that we are being stolen from. And what are stealing? Stealing our dreams, stealing the planet, our attention, our time, the future of the children, their dreams, and above all, their capacity to imagine a life beyond what they see on their newsfeed. That is the theft that nobody wants to name, because that is uncomfortable. Because suddenly you're like Sisyphus pushing against a giant rock, because naming it means asking who owns the platform and not just who is allowed to log in.
Thank you, Jean. It's very interesting. I think the time when kind of tech started becoming, like going into children's lives, it's kind of like the same time when I was growing up. And I saw as well, like you talked about like how these tech bros are basically starting culture wars and everything. It's interesting to see Tom from MySpace trying to reintroduce MySpace because he does not agree with algorithmic social media. So that's interesting to see. And I want to move back to Banita regarding how the protection and how these recommender systems, default settings, or engagement mechanism, how do they contribute to harm? And perhaps because you work on the region, I mean, Pepe Tunas itself, essentially, it has like good intentions, but the implementation is still kind of like questionable. But that aside, do you think ASEAN should pursue a regional framework for children's online safety, similar to maybe the EU's Digital Services Act, or maybe it's like it's very different on how we see this in Indonesia or in the region, in Southeast Asian region? Yeah, so just basically generally touching on risk-based obligations for these large platforms.
Well, thank you, Gustika. And I apologize earlier about taking too much time, because I think I missed the brief that in the TLR about that being only the opening remarks. So I went straight away to my to the question that was given to me. So to answer to your question about how ASEAN is approaching this as a framework, for me, first of all, I need to stress out that my position is actually on the IHR, meaning that this is an ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. So what we are dealing with is the human rights aspects of everything, including the digital age, the digital era. When it comes to this situation about children protection in the digital platforms, ASEAN actually already have several different instruments about that. They already recognize the importance of protecting children. I think in 2019 or so, there was a declaration that was adopted already in ASEAN, the Declaration on the Protection of Children from All Forms of Online Exploitation and Abuse. That was already existing. Right now, IHR itself already is currently in the process of developing a declaration on children mental health in digital age. So those are some of the declarations that are already in place. Other than that, actually, some other sectoral bodies also work on these aspects of protecting children, but different spaces and different issues. That is based on which sectoral bodies that are dealing with that. For instance, when it comes to ACWC is the ASEAN Committee on Women and Children. They are also doing quite a lot of work on protection of children, and they have produced some sort of framework for that. And then there's also other sectoral bodies that are working on issues that may be related to children protection in digital age. Like for instance, SOMTC, the Senior Official Ministers on Transnational Crimes, that would also that is working on people being trafficked and victims of trafficking, are also concerned about children that are being trafficked through social online social media and online measures. So there are some frameworks on that, and other sectoral bodies is also working on that, especially when it comes to SOMRI, for instance, the Senior Official Ministries of Rights to Information. Works on misinformation and disinformation, including for children. So there has been some framework on that. But the main problem is that instruments in ASEAN is not legally binding and has to be implemented by ASEAN member countries. At the end of the day, the instruments are there, but it really relies on the respective government to adopt them and to turn them into their own nation and to include them into their national plan of action and to implement them. In this case, these instruments that ASEAN already has would have to be like for instance in Indonesia, they use these PP Tunas as part of the alignment with the instruments that the ASEAN has already produced and already adopted. So that's my answer shortly, Gustika, to provide you with a sense of how ASEAN works. That yes, we are producing frameworks, we are producing some sort of a guidelines, and etc. But at the same time, when it comes to implementation, this is not legally binding, and what these instruments can do is to encourage ASEAN member states to adopt them and include them in their own national plan of action. Thank you.
Thank you, Manita, for the answer. And I would also like to ask Suyin, because we talked about Pepetunas, how in Indonesia, and we talked about like how it is in ASEAN, like how it's not, well, it's not legally binding because each of the country would have to, implement that into their national action plans and so forth. But I want to dig more on the Online Safety Act in Malaysia. I mean, we do see like how there's like a trend that Indonesia had the Pepetunas, and then there's the Online Safety Act. But before that, it was something that people claim that Indonesia copied from Australia as well, and they're very proud of that. But yeah, just to follow up, do you think the Online Safety Act actually meaningfully shifts the attention toward regulating platform systems and product design, or does it still focuses primarily on content moderation after harms have already occurred. Because from my understanding with the Online Safety Act, there's that from what I heard, there's like that facial recognition they're trying to implement and so forth. But with minors, it's also like a tricky sort of, it's tricky. So please go ahead.
I think that's a great question and also good framing. It's certainly Malaysia's ONSA also takes a lot of inspiration, if not outright copy from Australia as well. So you will see a lot of overlaps in terms of the risks and privacy concerns, and as well as access concerns, particularly for children and youth. That's I think similar now across the board, because we are using very much one framework without really interrogating what it means for a localized type of intervention, but also what it means to have a more, I think, regional coherence in its mitigation framework, particularly as we're looking at how the online space itself it's borderless, as it were. I think we'll come to that. But I think before I think address your question, I want to also say that I think credit should be where credit is due, at least in relations to the ONSA. I see a meaningful transition towards looking more beyond, the ad hoc reactive, takedown type of content moderation, towards a more systematic approach on the entire service platform itself, and really looking at the risk management obligations of service providers, as it were. I don't think it's fully fleshed out, and I think there's a lot of opportunities of where considerations could have been more brought in, and I'll talk about it a little bit. But it's definitely, have concerns in and around the same issues that was raised by Dr. Jean and by Mananita as well, which is, there is the regulations now still disproportionately puts the burden of accountability and burden of management, as it were, onto end users, particularly youths, and all of the detriments that I think we've listed out too, rather than placing more of the compliance burden onto tech platforms as well, tech providers themselves, right? And, based on our past research, we've already established very clearly that these platforms, beyond the profit model, that's very beyond the kind of business model that's very based on an engagement model that is highly pejorative, highly emotive, and therefore able to be able to monetize with high engagements. That's very detrimental to users. We've also established that actually a lot of these service provider platforms, particularly big tech, they are not neutral organizations, right? They're not only profit driven, but they are now increasingly more ideologically driven as well, right? So you have corporate boards that are now driving very specific corporate decisions that feed into your platform designs, your trust and safety designs, but also the investments that goes into recommendation systems, into algorithms, into content moderations, etc. So ONSA, coming back to that, I think ONSA acknowledges it, and it tries to kind of collapse the two pathways, which is like, how do we regulate more access of young people more systematically into these digital spaces, but also how do we now regulate really the risk management obligations. And there are some requirements to that, right? Where it's more systematic. It now requires platforms to identify and manage priority harms and submit online safety plans in and around its content mitigation approaches and mechanisms, reporting mechanisms, having more clear parental controls, privacy and safety settings, and also being able to show and ensure sort of appropriate search and recommendation type of mechanisms. The provisions of ONSA also now requires service providers or service platforms to conduct harmful conduct risk assessments, and using that to really inform, again, upgrading content mitigation and moderation measures to control things like discovery tools, and then recommendation outputs. I think one that's very interesting and highly welcome is that now there's also regulations around AI-generated content, so AI-generated images or videos, particularly those that manipulate the likeliness of people and places now needs to be clearly labeled as well. And then there's also another piece in and around what's permissible advertising, types of advertising, and where advertisings can be showcased, essentially tied to what type of content. So I think in that sense, it's moving towards, generally the right direction. But again, I want to come back and say that there is a lot of under considerations for this policy. I think what it does regulate is exposure of harms to children, or to users generally, I feel. But coming back to what Dr. Jin was saying, that it doesn't address the incentives of these platforms and the incentives of designing the platforms the way they are, designing the algorithms the way they are. So it potentially, it's useful to regulate where the high tail risks are, or like, the most harmful risks potentially you can curb and regulate. Or I think more concerning would be you're able to redesign your platform use around some of these platform policies, because there's always going to be loopholes that can be exploited on these platforms if there's no attention paid to this, right? So you're only able to regulate where you're paying attention to, and then you're not regulating what you're not paying attention to, essentially. And it really doesn't essentially address the fact that these platforms are incentivized by the highest amount of monetization and engagements, and the laws doesn't hold that accountable, one. But even if it did, what is the legal infrastructure's capability of holding that accountability to date? So I'll give you an example where, like, your users are, local and citizens. Your platforms are based primarily in the global north, so in North America. Your data centers or your service centers that host the content are in a third country that has very loose regulations in and around like digital rights and safety. But then also the users, particularly in relations to like harming children or consuming harmful content as it relates to children, such as like online sex trafficking or like child pornography, and then also in a different jurisdiction altogether. So now you have a global issue, but you can only legislate locally to the degree that you're able to then enforce it. But then also locally, the enforcement is very difficult to be enacted, because it's a very piecemeal type of legal documents and acts, right? Because there is no one body or no one regulatory body that's able to review and oversee and monitor and then enforce accountability onto these platforms. It's very, very fragmented. So internally it's fragmented, but then on the upstream as well, where the content distribution and access is being happened, is also incredibly fragmented. So the challenge is not so much on, whether there is one policy that is an end all be all, but I think how do you build coherence in its sort of digital safety mechanisms and infrastructure that's able to then meaningfully, reduce the risk and on these platforms, and then working with these tech companies or enforcing tech companies to remove a lot of this risk to begin with, by addressing more concretely your recommendation systems, your content moderation systems, your algorithmic systems, etc. I think right now, we're definitely not there, but it's a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Suyan. And I just want to remind the attendees that we are definitely open for question and answers. You could submit the questions in the Q&A box. Has there been any, Aldi? No? Okay. I'll just wait for the questions. But while we wait for the questions from the audience, maybe I'll do a follow-up question to Dr. Jean-Lin Denko. So we talked about a lot about how this is basically, the tech industry is running on basically incentives, but essentially, like, how as a digital rights expert, how can policymakers actually strike an appropriate balance between child safety, privacy, and these rights while avoiding unintended consequences as surveillance or exclusion? Because sorry, there's a noise outside. So sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. How can policymakers strike an appropriate balance between child safety, privacy, and children's rights while avoiding those unintended consequences, such as surveillance or exclusion? And how can we keep these platforms, accountable as well? So we're not only shifting the blame or responsibility just towards the governments, but it would be something like more collective, because we do see, governments are, doing these attempts, to regulate these platforms, but yeah, how can we all do that without disregarding digital rights, especially of children?
Yeah. Well, first, I feel like I would want to reframe your question in a more materialist, I guess, foundation, because I feel like you're asking what would it look like to regulate the relation of production instead of the relation of access. Because there is no balance to strike as long as the incentive structure stays exactly where it is. And I think the framing of balance is what I want to push back on. That is a trap that policymakers like to walk themselves into. A balance implies that there are two roughly equal forces that need to be weighed against each other, and calibrated it must be. Privacy on one side, access on the another, safety on another, and then suddenly it's a policymaker's job is to find the fair midpoint. That is a hedge position that is sitting on the fence, and that is not what actually is happening in this industry. Because on one side, you have a business model that generates revenue in direct proportion to how much data it extracts and how long it keeps a user engaged. And on the other side, you have a set of values, privacy, well-being, safety, that generate no revenue at all unless they are forced into existence by quote-unquote regulation. And those two are not comparable weights on any scale, because one of them is actively, structurally, materially incentivized, and the other has to be manufactured against the grain of the entire system. So when you have a policymaker that sits down to suddenly strike a balance, what usually happens in practice is that the side with a built-in incentive wins almost every negotiation, because it has a lobbying budget. The technical complexity as a shield and the threat of relocating operations, suddenly the terms get too inconvenient. And the other side, without an incentive, gets whatever concession is cheapest for the industry to make. And that's how you end up with an age gating standing in for actual safety, because it looks like balance was struck, a restriction was imposed, a policy was passed, and then they run for elections, and then underlying incentive that produced the harm in the first place was never touched. So the harm simply reorganizes itself around new rule, and it continues. Because if we actually want to change the outcomes rather than produce the appearance of having some problems addressed, we have to stop treating privacy and safety as the two things in tension. Because the real tension is between the profit motive of the platform and the well-being of the child. And the policy has to be willing to name that tension directly instead of laundering it into a more comfortable conversation about where to draw a line on data collection. That means liability that actually lands on people who set the engagement targets. Like it's not a compliance department that absorbs the fine as a line item. It means mandatory design reviews before a recommendation system is allowed anywhere near anyone, not a voluntary code of conduct that the industry writes themselves. And it means structurally separating the decision to maximize engagement from the decision to protect a user. Because I think the battle here is I just want to push back, because the battle here is not corporate versus state. The real battle is between a capital, whether it wears a corporate logo or a government seal, and the working class whose attention, whose time, whose children keep getting fed into it either way, And that's why I want to also push back on the title of this panel, Rethinking Child Safety. Rethinking implies that the concept needs a tune-up. The problem is that safety has already been defined for us. It has been defined by exactly the people who benefit from defining it cheaply. The platforms who get to call an age gate safety instead of redesign, and then the states who get to call surveillance safety instead of accountability, because we do not need to rethink child safety. We need to ask who has been allowed to write the definition and notice that it has served everyone sitting at the table except those who are actually getting impacted by it. Southeast Asia does not. I just want to emphasize it. Southeast Asia does not need another generation of working class children locked out of one space where they still find each other, while the platforms that profited from their exploitation keep the algorithm, keep the profit, and hand the state a population to discipline in their place. Because we need to regulate the ownership, we need to regulate the design, we need to tax the extraction, because this is the safety in this region that this region children actually deserves, and is the only version of safety that does not simply reproduce the same class order that failed the children to begin with.
Thank you, Eugene, for the answer. And we also just received two questions at the Q&A in the Q&A box. I'll just read them both out loud, and yeah. The first question is from Mariam Cecil. Has there been any progress within ASEAN countries to integrate extensive digital literacy education within schools? Considering all of our speakers are from different countries, from Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, maybe each of you could answer that as well. And there is another question from Carlos Santos. Isn't it also dangerous to ban social media platforms, as it may just drive the youth audience to other smaller and non-regulated platforms, similar to the Australian experience, and hence can potentially cause more harm because predators may be there. Maybe I'll open it to Manita Wahid first, and then I'll go to Suyan, and then
Right. Okay. So for the first question, I think from Mariam about well, she said that has there been any progress within ASEAN countries to integrate extensive digital literacy education within schools? So shortly, there has been progress, but I would not yet describe it as extensive or consistent across ASEAN, because at the regional level, ASEAN adopted several different declarations, including the Declaration on the Digital Transformation of Education Systems in 2022. And then this particular declaration defines digital literacy not only as the technical ability to use devices, but as the knowledge, skills, and attitudes needed for learners and teachers to be both safe and empowered in the digital world. So, and on another matter, ASEAN has developed educational resources on media literacy and disinformation. At the national level, several ASEAN member states have incorporated elements of digital literacy, ICT competency, different degrees of coding, cyber wellness, online safety, which are incorporated into their curricula, and including in this case, including also teacher training. Malaysia, for example, has expanded digital learning through this program called Delima, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Yin, please correct me if I'm wrong. Singapore has more established cyber wellness education. Indonesia also has informatics and digital literacy elements within its education system. I was the coordinator of the first team that built the digital literacy curriculum for the Ministry of ICT back then. It has developed even more comprehensively right now. To different degrees, these three countries have already implemented digital literacy. However, the implementation itself remains highly uneven, especially within if we are looking at the whole ASEAN 11 countries as an ecosystem. So it's not only the uneven thing is not only between countries, but also between the communities inside domestically within countries as well. For instance, between urban and rural schools, between well-resourced and disadvantaged communities, between remote areas and easily accessed areas. So much of what is called digital literacy still concentrates on using devices and applications, and it does not always sufficiently cover critical thinking as well. It does not cover on how to manage your privacy, on understanding and recognizing platform manipulation, recommender system on how to and how to manage online relationships and be cautious about it, on misinformation, on responsible participation as citizens, and especially in not knowing how to seek help. So I would say ASEAN has established the policy direction through these instruments. And before I mentioned that it's not legally binding because it's the way it is incorporated is the authority of each member states, and individual countries have promising programs as well at this point. But we are still some distance from comprehensive, continuous digital citizenship education for every child that has become the dream of ASEAN that is stated in the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. That is precisely why access restrictions, as our earlier discussion, cannot carry the full responsibility for child protection. Because if we restrict children's access without making this educational investment, we leave the developmental part of the problem unresolved. I think that's my answer, Kustika. Thank you.
Thank you, Manita. And Suyin, might you want to take the...
Yeah, I want to build on what Anita has mentioned and also address Carlos's question about it being dangerous to ban social media, as it would drive youth audiences to smaller and unregulated platforms. I mean, I highly agree. I think one of the immediate challenge that we see with the age restriction, obviously, is that, I mean, like, your users are very smart, right? And it will continually drive young people or any users to less regulated spaces of the internet. That, you know, is more of a proponent of free speech, however disgusting or harmful it is there, but then you don't have the surveillance of Big Brother in these spaces, right, for free expressions. And I think building on where that intervention needs to be, you know, and rather than it solely resting on what Jean says, that on the age restriction, is we need to now look beyond the digital realm and not only legislate in and around the digital spaces and its interactions, but how are you also building community and societal resilience outside of it, right? And so what's really driving young people to the online spaces and still experiencing depression and anxiety and isolation, on top of not having the right kind of digital literacy and information systems literacy that's very much required now in our upbringing, I want to posit that says that there is also, you know, this type of movement is also driven by a disappearing third spaces in your everyday life. Like, where are young people going to socialize, going to create hobbies, going to create communities outside of on an online sphere? But also, like, how do you build positive and healthy relationships with family members, with your, you know, authoritative figures, among peers, etc.? Like, where are we learning these habits now and these behaviors? When, again, you know, if these frameworks and role models are not available, you will turn to the most accessible way to do it, which is through the internet. And really, case in point, I would invite you to really, the next time you go out to an F&B outlet, just look around you and see who's actually using, you know, mobile phones, right? Not only do you see adults who are giving, you know, screen time to you know, children at the dinner table because it's the easiest way to appease them, but you also see adults themselves being incredibly hooked on the screens. So if adults themselves are modeling a type of behavior of addiction, right, of doom scrolling online, like, young people will then have a question mark. It's like, how can you have a do as I say, not as I do sort of policy on the ground as well. So I think being able to build that kind of social communal resilience will help mitigate, I think, the way how young people can be more smart about the way they navigate an incredibly difficult and tricky and landscape online. And I think a lot of these are all various approaches that we need to be considerate in as a nexus, right? We need to be able to address the platforms where we can. But then what we also know is that there will always be spaces, dark corners of the internet that will remain dangerous and that young people will continue to find. And then there will be some layers and elements where it will be a lot harder to legislate or to enforce or to take down. And so the only way you can kind of respond to that, at least until those risks are removed, is to be able to build the kind of social, mental, and resilience to wandering off into these spaces and being hooked to it. And I think lastly, I just want to bring up the fact that there is an expectation that governments and this capital and academics and civil society organizations and experts are really at odds with each other in relations to child protection online and child safety, or even just regulation of these platforms. I think where there is demand, there will also always be the service and the provision, right? So there needs to be a lot more of a value-aligned collaboration and partnership, I feel, even with the service provider platforms, in order to be able to build or rebuild its incentive structures in order to ensure that their platforms are safe, because also it's a reputational risk, right? You see, to a very minor degree, I want to say, the flight from X initially, as X started deregulating its trust and safety guardrails, where now it's just filled with hate speech, it's filled with bots, it's filled with content that's not real. It's a lot of fake AI, and then you have an insane man that's kind of like warlording over this digital space for himself. And so it hyper concentrates a certain type of individuals and users and communities to it, because the reputation of that platform is already at risk and it has changed. And I think there is from there an incentive to be able to work with companies to not only change their designs and their incentive models, but also to then work with really the tech and digital data engineering infrastructure to be able to promote and build new infrastructures, new types of social media ecosystems and platforms that are more holistic, that are more rights-based, that have more protective measures in place that people can still really enjoy. And I think there are small and emerging types of platforms and providers that can benefit from more, I think, economic and political support into developing these to provide an alternative online space and ecosystem for users, rather than relying on the large platforms that you and I are familiar with today.
Thank you, Suyin. And last but not least, Jean, if you would answer the question that was in the Q&A as well. Has there been any progress, maybe in the Philippines, to integrate digital literacy education? And is it dangerous to ban social media platforms? Maybe they would, cause more harm, especially that since you're in Australia, maybe you could answer this the best. But before you answer, I would also like to remind everyone that actually we're pressed for time. So I would like to welcome Jean to answer and also give a closing remark at the same time. Thank you.
I want to answer, was it Carlos' question?
Yes, it was Carlos.
Yes, it's actually true. And I just want to expound that the children are not being radicalized because they are young and unsupervised online. They are radicalized because of a recommendation structure engineered to maximize engagement at any cost. So these companies found exactly the raw material, which I kept saying, probably you're tired of hearing the raw material that they are using to exploit. So what are these raw materials that I'm trying to say? So that's isolation, grievance, a search for meaning that no other institution was funded or organized to meet amidst an ecological collapse. That isolation does not or did not appear nowhere. It is produced by the same economic order that, capitalism hollowed out public education. It offers generation debt and precarity instead of a future that has nothing to give an alienated child except an attention economy's promise of so-called belongingness. The platform did not create that vacuum, but it found it. It monetized it. But an age gate does not close that vacuum. It does not touch the recommendation system, as I pointed out a while ago. It did not touch the recommendation system that walked those children step by step, and each step becoming more and more engaging and more profitable than the last. And that system keeps running exactly as designed on whichever children remain permitted to log in. And I'm not sure if Carlos is from the Philippines. I'm from the Philippines, so I just want to say it with emphasis on my native tongue. Hindi sa pamamagitan ng age gating natin matutuklasan kung sino talaga ang dapat managot. Sino sila? Kundi ang mga nagmamay-ari at kumikita ng milyon-milyon o even bilyon-bilyong dolyares sa makinaryang sumisira hindi lamang sa ating kabataan kundi hindi na rin para sa ating kalayaang mag-isip. To respond to this system with an age gate is to protect the very machinery of profit. Southeast Asia, I've said, does not need another generation of working class children locked out of one space where they can still find each other.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Jean.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much. That was a very great closing. I would like definitely quote that somewhere in my research. And may I also welcome Suyin and Anita for their closing remarks as well. Maybe I'll start with Suyin.
Oof, I'm still digesting what Jean had said. So that if I can just add on to Jean's closing remark. I think, there are long-term battles that Jean had, I think, outlined very clearly what needs to be done. And then you have the intermediary and, short-term and intermediary battles that need to be done. The ONSA, at least coming back more specifically to Malaysia, the Online Safety Act is an iteration of this, and it's not perfect. But I think what it is also a very quick illustration that the capabilities of the ecosystem outside of these types of tech providers, capitalistic focused tech providers, are not anywhere close to being able to bring the type of mandate and enforcement and accountability and change needed to ensure a more even and human rights focused based type of platforms. Not even close. Whether it's because of resources in terms of capital, whether it's in terms of knowledge, the knowledge economy, on the attention economy, on how these algorithms are built, how are they designed, what kind of data they retain, what kind of training is being undertaken. It's a complete black box. And until we're able to also close that gap, this challenge, at least in the immediate and immediate term, will continue to be something that we need to gradually hack away at, right? And then build regional coalition as well in order to do that. I think I will close with this also, is that we can't do this by individual states to individual states. It's very clear now that the problem itself, it's beyond the sovereign level. It has to be regional corporations, but also where are the right markets that will really bring the right kind of political and financial incentives to make change to the current landscape that we are currently navigating and experiencing now. But thank you so much for the opportunity, Gustika and CSOH, and to my fellow speakers as well. I look forward to continue connecting online next time.
Thank you so much, Suyin, and may I welcome Anita for her closing remarks.
Same as Suyin, I'm still digesting what Jin has said. Got a lot of things to ponder upon on that. So I would probably say I'm just going to go back to our question about protecting children online, which I think requires more than restricting access. It requires safer platform design. Obviously, we all agree on that. It also requires accountable governance and sustained investment in digital education. But it also requires a cooperation between the government, platforms, as well as civil society, which sometimes are being overlooked and not being included within the deliberation of any rules, anything that actually needs participations. So uh, going back to protecting children, we should prepare children progressively instead of restricting them from digital platforms. We should prepare children progressively to become to become informed, critical, and responsible users, and eventually becomes users that possess digital maturity, rather than expecting digital maturity to arrive automatically at a certain age. So our success should be measured not only by how many children are kept off platforms, but by whether the digital environment is safe and children are better equipped to navigate it. Obviously, there are so many things that we need to address, including all the points that has been raised by Jin and Suyin. And since I'm representing ICHR Indonesia in this case, what ICHR can do to close the gap between what we have right now to the dream that we want to achieve on a safer digital environment. ICHR can help connect child online safety with the wider regional human rights framework. ICHR can help encourage rights-based guidance on platform governance. ICHR can also help create interfaces among regulators, child rights bodies, civil society, researchers, and industry, and also promote regional principles for transparency, risk assessment, remedy, and meaningful child participation. So right now, I don't think that ASEAN need identical national laws in terms of digital children protection in online, but children should not receive radically different levels of protection as well, simply because they cross a digital border. So I think that's the end of my closing remarks, Gustika. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the speakers. On behalf of the Center for the Study of Organized Hate, I'd like to sincerely thank our panelists for sharing their expertise and thoughtful insights. Thank you also to everyone who joined us today and contributed questions and as well, perspectives throughout the discussion. I enjoyed looking at the Q&A. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer all of it today. So today's conversation reminds us that protecting children online requires more than just limiting access to digital platforms, but definitely answering the core issues and everything that is related to it. It requires examining systems, incentives, design choices that shape these experiences. And if you would like to stay informed about CSOH's research and upcoming events, please visit our website and subscribe to our mailing list. And once again, thank you again for joining us, and please stay connected, stay engaged, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much.